Eduleadership show for August 13th, 2025. I'm your host, Justin Bader, and in this episode, we'll be talking about cuts to some federal programs that could result in reductions in the number of students who are eligible for school lunch programs. We'll talk about an alternative to school meal programs that I think might have some potential. And we'll talk about deliberate practice. And I'll share with you some quotes from a great article by an author on deliberate practice and grading. First up, NEA President Becky Pringle was in Time magazine this week arguing that the new tax bill will starve public schools. And there are some really good quotes here that I think are worth thinking about, as well as some complex policy issues that are going to need to be untangled. We're going to have to figure out what to do about these. So she says something that I agree with absolutely here in the article. Our children can't learn if they are hungry. And she goes on to say, as a middle school science teacher for more than 30 years, I've seen the pain that hunger creates. It's the student who skips breakfast so she can give it to her little brother. It's the student who misbehaves because his stomach is rumbling. It's the students who struggle in class after a weekend where they didn't have a single full meal. And I think that is a very legitimate concern. But what I wonder is why we don't really think about what happens to students when they're outside of school. And I think we're right to want to feed kids in school. We're right to want to protect the school breakfast and lunch program. I think those are good programs. They're necessary programs. But I also think they're not quite good enough precisely because kids are not in school all of the time. And to really understand what's happening here, we also have to talk about SNAP. And if you read the article in Time magazine, you will see that the cuts that are being discussed there are not actually cuts to the federal school lunch program. They're actually cuts to SNAP. And you might think, well, wait, I thought SNAP was food stamps, not school lunch program. And you would be right. The article links to a little bit of an explainer from the Urban Institute that says changes to SNAP could reduce student access to free meals. And what's happening here is around eligibility, and especially automatic eligibility. And there are two forms of automatic eligibility for free and reduced priced meals at school that you need to understand this issue. The first is direct certification. If a student qualifies for SNAP, if they get food stamps, they automatically get free lunch. And millions of kids get free lunch that way because they get food stamps. The second mechanism is the community eligibility provision, which basically says if enough kids in your community get food stamps, everybody in your school gets free breakfast and free lunch at school. You don't have to have each individual family apply. And that affects a lot of schools. A lot of schools in high poverty neighborhoods rely on the fact that everybody gets free breakfast and free lunch to fund their breakfast and lunch programs. And I think we absolutely have to protect this funding. We need to make sure that all kids get the food that they need to be successful in school. But I think this is also a good opportunity to think a little bit more broadly about feeding kids, the urgency of feeding kids, not just when school is in session, but all of the time. And I know there are a lot of great programs out there. There are backpack programs that send home groceries with kids for the weekend. There are summer feeding programs. There are all these great programs that attempt to address the reality that kids are not in school all the time. And if you have 180 days in the school year and you're feeding kids 2 meals a day, that's great, that's necessary, but it's not sufficient. It is not adequate to feed kids half of the days of the year and only 2 meals out of 3. Kids need to eat dinner. Kids need to eat on the weekends. Kids need to eat over summer vacation. And I think we just need to think more expansively than food stamps and school lunch programs. I think we also need to be thinking about how, as a society, not necessarily for schools to do this, but as a society, how could we make sure that kids are never hungry? I think that is what we should be aiming for, not just never hungry at school, but never hungry period. And I think we've got to look at just like what's possible in our world now because so much has changed, right? The original idea behind school breakfast and lunch was that hot food is hard to prepare. Like if you're a kid, you probably can't cook yourself a whole meal. So having schools do that was revolutionary at the time. Well, that was a long time ago. We have microwaves now. Kids can feed themselves if they have food in their homes. They can have hot meals with a microwave, and it's not much more complicated than that. And over the last couple of years, especially since the pandemic, we've seen things like Walmart Plus and other grocery delivery programs. And I'm not sure if you've checked the pricing on this, but they have a student program and they have one for people who are on public assistance of some form like SNAP. $50 a year. For $50 a year, we could be sending kids groceries to their houses so that they're not hungry ever, not just when they're in school. But let me know what you think. Next up, my colleague Robert Talbert, PhD, who's a professor of mathematics at Grand Valley State University in Michigan and who's the author of the book Grading for Growth, has a new article over on his Substack of the same title. And that article is called Alternative Grading and Deliberate Practice. And in this article, he explains that deliberate practice is hard work, right? Like if you just pick up the guitar and play around with it, that can be a lot of fun. You can get better, but you're not going to get better really fast unless you are engaging in deliberate practice. And often we don't engage in deliberate practice because it's hard. If you're really enjoying yourself, if you're having a great time, if it's fun, if it's easy, it's probably not deliberate practice. Deliberate practice is probably much more like what you experienced in an advanced math class. It is hard work. Your brain is sweating when you're engaging in deliberate practice. But Robert says in this article something that I think is really powerful. Top performers are usually the best at what they do because they're the best at practicing what they do. It's not that they have something innate, it's that they have figured out how to get better. And he says it this way, not just any kind of practice, but what's called deliberate practice. Top performers aren't the ones who are built differently. They're the ones who practice differently, who practice deliberately. If you're interested in more on this topic, check out Robert's Substack. We'll put a link in the show notes. And also check out the book by Anders Ericsson, Peak, Secrets from the New Science of Expertise. And I found that book by looking into Seth Godin's book, Outliers, where he talks about the 10,000 hour rule. But Ericsson says that's not a magic number. What really matters is the amount of deliberate practice you get, not just 10,000 hours of anything, but lots and lots of time on deliberate practice. If you would like to engage in some deliberate practice getting into classrooms this year, I want to invite you to download our template for classroom visit note cards. You can write out each teacher's schedule and then keep track of your visits to every teacher throughout the school year to make sure you get to every class, every period at some point throughout the year. 3 visits a day will do it. We've got more in the Instructional Leadership Challenge, but you can download this free template at principalcenter.com/notecards. That's it for this episode of the Eduleadership Show. I'm Justin Bader, and if you have something you'd like me to feature in an upcoming episode, let me know.